My fiancée, her parents mocked my late mom at our engagement party, but what I did next made them regret every word. Subscribe so you don't miss what's next. My mother was the type who helped anyone without question. She once co-signed a loan for Olivia's parents to renovate their house. We trusted them because my mom believed in chosen family, and Olivia always praised her as a second mother. But looking back, there were hints how they smirked whenever mom offered advice, how Olivia rolled her eyes behind her back. Those signs were subtle, but they were always there, ignored in blind affection. At our first joint family dinner, my mom brought handmade gifts for Olivia's parents, framed family photos and heirloom recipes. Marianne barely looked at them, muttering something about clutter. Donald asked if my mom knew how to email instead of playing pioneer woman. Olivia laughed along. I remember brushing it off, thinking maybe they just had odd humor. But mom's polite smile faded fast that night, and I never saw her bring a gift again. At Olivia's bridal shower, her mother raised a toast and said, "Here's to a new family, one that doesn't hover or guilt trip." Some guests chuckled, but I felt my stomach drop. Olivia caught my eye and smirked like I should just roll with it. My cousin nudged me, whispering, "Was that about your mom?" I laughed it off, but inside I felt a chill. The digs were getting louder and bolder right under everyone's noses. During a cake tasting, Donald joked, "No raisins, right? We're not cooking like it's 1950. Your mom's not on the guest list." Olivia giggled, pretending to hush him. I stared, unsure if I'd heard right. The baker froze awkwardly. "Just teasing," Donald added, but it didn't feel like a joke. Olivia didn't defend my mom, she grinned. I felt humiliated. Each comment chipped at her memory, and I stood there, complicit in silence, afraid to ruin peace. Olivia's bridal registry included an upgrade kit, items to replace old-fashioned gifts from well-meaning but outdated relatives. I saw my mom's framed recipe card listed for return. I asked Olivia, and she shrugged. "It's not personal, just aesthetics." My chest tightened. That card was my mother's handwriting, a piece of her. I bit my tongue, unsure how to explain grief to someone who turned sentiment into decor. Everyone praised Olivia's modern taste. I felt alone. At a family BBQ, Donald told a story about my mom tripping over a garden hose, mimicking her voice. Everyone laughed. I clenched my jaw, hoping Olivia would step in. Instead, she added, "She was sweet but dramatic." My fists curled. My dad turned to me, his expression tight, but said nothing. I realized then we weren't overreacting. We were tolerating cruelty disguised as jokes. I smiled tightly, but inside my grief boiled into rage. I overheard Olivia telling her bridesmaids, "At least my parents won't baby him like his mom did." They laughed. My chest burned. I backed away quietly, my hands shaking. When I confronted Olivia later, she said, "You're too sensitive, can't take a joke." That phrase echoed like a slap. My grief wasn't a punchline. I walked out of the rehearsal dinner that night, phone buzzing with texts I ignored. I couldn't fake a smile anymore. The next morning, Olivia sent a meme of a clingy mom, captioned, "Just like yours, lol." I didn't reply. Hours later, her mother texted a photo of their dog in one of mom's old knitted sweaters, thrift score. I stared at it, heart pounding. That sweater was hand-stitched during my mom's chemo. My dad saw the message and walked out of the room, silent. I felt my throat close. This wasn't passive, it was deliberate mockery. During a family brunch, Olivia announced, "We're skipping that candle ceremony thing Brendan's mom wanted, too depressing." I looked up, stunned. It had been my mom's only request before she passed. Marianne added, "Weddings should be light, not morbid." I felt heat crawl up my neck. Raymond, my father, cleared his throat but stayed quiet. My hands trembled under the table. That moment solidified it. Her memory wasn't just erased, it was mocked, by the people I'd trusted. At the engagement party, Donald raised his glass and said, "To letting go of the past, and embracing a less emotional future." He winked. Laughter followed. I stood frozen, the crowd's faces blurring. Olivia whispered, "Smile," but I couldn't. My dad stepped beside me, his hand firm on my shoulder. "Don't," he said softly. That one word, firm, protective, snapped something in me. The silence that followed was louder than the laughter. My heart raced. I took the mic from the GD, voice shaking but clear. "Enough." Heads turned. "My mother gave her love, her money, and her time to this family. You dishonor her with every joke." Olivia gasped. Donald chuckled. "Let's not ruin the mood." I stared him down. "You already did." Raymond stepped closer. "She was better than all of this." The room was silent. My heart pounded, but my voice didn't waver. I'd finally spoken for her. Olivia stormed toward me, grabbing my arm. "You're embarrassing yourself," she hissed. I pulled free. "No, I'm honoring her." Her mother called out, "Let's not dramatize a few jokes." I held up a framed recipe card. "She's not a punchline." I placed it on the gift table and walked away. The guests stared, some looked down. Raymond followed silently in that moment. I chose my mother's memory over a marriage built on mockery. And I didn't regret it. Outside, Olivia chased after me. "You're throwing everything away over a dead woman." My jaw clenched. "That dead woman raised me with more love than your whole family knows how to fake." Her face twisted. "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "No, I regret not seeing it sooner." Raymond opened the car door. I slid in, refusing to look back. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. I'd made the right call. The next day, Olivia's father emailed a formal apology laced with passive aggression. He said he was sorry feelings got hurt, and suggested I reconsider before ruining reputations. I forwarded it to my lawyer. Raymond said, "You don't owe them silence." That line echoed in me. I posted the screenshots, along with a tribute to my mom, on social media. The comments flooded in support, outrage, validation. Finally, the world saw the truth I'd lived through. Reporters reached out after my post. A local podcast asked to feature the story. I hesitated, then agreed. I shared what my mother did for Olivia's family. How they mocked her in return. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. Olivia's bridesmaids started pulling out of the wedding. Vendors canceled. The venue asked questions. I didn't gloat. I grieved loudly and honestly. My mom's legacy was being defended. And I wasn't alone anymore in doing it. That weekend, I visited my mom's grave with Raymond. I placed the returned recipe card on her stone, tears blurring my eyes. They laughed, but I didn't let them win. I whispered. Raymond squeezed my shoulder. She'd be proud. The wind stirred. I stood taller. For the first time since her funeral, I felt peace. The wedding was off, the damage done, but my dignity, and hers, remained untouched. That was a victory I'd never forget. A few distant relatives reached out, unsure how to respond. Some said I was brave, others thought I overreacted. But when Olivia's cousin privately messaged, "I always felt your mom was the only warm adult in the room," I cried. Validation came in whispers, not headlines. That one message outweighed the rest. It reminded me I hadn't imagined the warmth she gave, or the coldness from them. Sometimes truth doesn't roar, it nods quietly in your inbox. A week later, Olivia tried one last time. She showed up at my apartment with tear-streaked cheeks and a scrapbook. "This is all I have left," she whispered. I flipped through pages, photos of us, notes. Even one from my mom. "She loved you," Olivia said. I nodded. "Then you shouldn't have loved her back." I handed the scrapbook back. "This doesn't erase what you laughed at." I closed the door. Her sobbing echoed. But I didn't reopen it. 3 days after Olivia left, her father sent a legal notice accusing me of defamation. It was laughable. He cited emotional distress over my public posts. My lawyer called it a scare tactic, but I felt the old panic return. Could they really flip this? Raymond stood firm. "They underestimated your spine. Let's show them your receipts." I gathered every message, every photo. Their attempt to silence me would only amplify the truth I carried. Olivia posted a long message online, claiming I'd twisted everything, and that my mother had been controlling. She painted herself as the victim, saying the wedding collapse was a smear campaign. But one of her bridesmaids, unexpectedly, commented, "You laughed when his mom's sweater got turned into a dog joke. Don't rewrite it now." The thread exploded. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The truth had found another voice. One I didn't have to push. A journalist reached out with screenshots from a private group chat Olivia's friends had leaked. It showed Olivia mocking my grief, saying, "He'll get over his mommy issues once I'm pregnant." My stomach turned. It wasn't just disrespect, it was premeditated cruelty. The article that followed didn't name her, but readers pieced it together. Her employer saw it too. Within days, she was placed on leave. Actions had consequences, and for once, they weren't mine. Olivia's uncle, a quiet man at every party, emailed me. I tried to speak up once. He wrote, but was told to stay out of emotional theatrics. "Your mother was kindness incarnate." He included a photo I'd never seen: mom helping Marianne after surgery, feeding her soup. My hands trembled. They'd hidden this, erased it. But now pieces of truth surfaced from unexpected corners. Each one a small rebellion against the silence they tried to force. Raymond found an old voicemail from mom, her voice warm, saying she hoped Olivia would be a blessing. We played it together, tears falling. I posted the clip with the caption, "She wished them well." They mocked her. It went viral. Thousands commented, many sharing their own stories of betrayal. What started as personal grief became communal validation. I wasn't just defending mom anymore. I was standing with every person whose kindness was mistaken for weakness. Marianne emailed a weak apology. "We didn't mean to offend. Grief makes things blurry." I didn't reply. Instead, I shared her past messages, the ones mocking my mother's sweaters, her voice, even her funeral playlist. People saw the contrast. Sympathy shifted. Olivia deleted her account. Donald's business page was bombarded with 1-star reviews. They'd underestimated how far kindness echoes and how deeply cruelty stains. I didn't ask for revenge, but truth has a way of correcting things. Olivia's sister reached out next. They always hated how much your mom helped, she confessed. It made them feel small, I asked. Why didn't anyone stop them, she replied. We weren't brave, you were. Her voice cracked. I'm sorry, I didn't offer forgiveness. But I didn't hang up either. Maybe she was the first to truly understand what they'd done. And maybe silence isn't strength. Sometimes it's cowardice dressed in comfort. I chose the opposite. One day, a stranger approached me at the grocery store. Your post about your mom, she said, voice trembling. It helped me stand up to my own in-laws. She hugged me. That moment hit harder than any headline. My grief had ripples reaching people I'd never met, offering them courage I once lacked. Mom's memory wasn't just defended, it became a shield for others. In losing her, I'd ignited something powerful. I never saw that coming. An old teacher of mine messaged, I remember your mom from parent-teacher nights. She brought cookies and made everyone feel safe. I hadn't spoken to him in years. That tiny message undid me. All the mocking, all the silence, it hadn't erased her impact. People remembered. She lived in gestures, memories, warmth. The Sandersons tried to shrink her legacy into punchlines. But love, real love, leaves echoes. And mine were finally rising above the noise. A community center invited me to speak on boundaries and grief. At first, I declined. What did I know? But Raymond encouraged me. You lived it, he said. So I went. I told them everything, how love got mocked, how silence became protection, how truth cracked it open. The room was still afterward. A woman whispered, thank you for not staying quiet. I walked out lighter. My pain had turned into purpose. That I knew was healing. Raymond shared one last gift, an old voicemail from Mom I'd never heard. Brendan, she said, her voice tired but steady, if they ever hurt you, don't stay quiet. Stand up. You're stronger than they think. I listened to it a dozen times. That message had waited, tucked away for the right moment. And here it was, her voice guiding me even after she was gone. I saved it to every device. Her words would never be lost. One night, I received a handwritten letter. It was from Olivia's grandmother. I'm ashamed of them, she wrote. Your mother once helped me fix a leaky faucet when no one else would. She enclosed a photo of them smiling, elbow deep in a sink repair. I cried, even in moments I never saw. Mom had left kindness behind. The Sandersons tried to bury her under jokes, but roots like hers run too deep to erase. My lawyer called Donald had dropped the defamation threat. No case to build, she said. They're hoping you'll just let it fade. But I wasn't done. I submitted my experience to a grief advocacy group. They published it with my name. I wanted my mother's story to be more than a cautionary tale. It became a tribute, a call to speak up. Their silence didn't get the last word, mine did, and it rang with truth. Olivia tried to attend a mutual friend's baby shower. The host politely turned her away. I stand with Brendan, she said. Olivia left in silence. I didn't gloat when I heard. I just felt, still. The world hadn't forgotten. People had picked sides, and not by force, but by watching the truth unfold. Mockery lost its mask. My silence, once seen as weakness, had become a statement. Not loud, not violent, just unflinching, just enough. A counselor reached out, asking if I'd co-host a grief support session. Your clarity cuts through, she said. I accepted. The room was full, young widows. Children of estranged parents. Folks like me. I spoke of laughter that hurt, jokes that weren't jokes, and standing up when it's easier to sit down. Afterward, a teen approached and made a collage like your recipe card. She whispered. I hugged her. Grief had bridged strangers. And that meant everything. One final twist. Olivia emailed, begging for a private conversation. Not to win, she wrote. To understand. I debated replying. Raymond said, understanding can erase harm. I responded simply, it's too late. No blame, no anger, just truth. That was all I had left to give. Her regret wasn't my responsibility. I'd spent too long trying to explain love to people who mocked it. Now, I reserved that effort for those who valued it. I opened an old storage box and found Mom's last Christmas card to Olivia. Inside she wrote, I'm proud my son chose you. My chest ached. I posted a photo with the caption, she welcomed them, they mocked her. No commentary, no attack, just her words. It broke people's hearts. Comments poured in, she deserved better. You honored her. In that quiet post, without venom, the world saw who she was and who they weren't. Months later, I was invited to contribute to a grief anthology. I submitted my story. Not just the betrayal but the little things, the sweaters, the recipes, the voicemail. The editor called it achingly honest. I smiled. It wasn't about exposing Olivia anymore. It was about preserving Mom. She became more than a footnote in my hurt. She became a full chapter in how I healed. Her memory wasn't a battleground anymore, it was a beacon. A family friend sent me a photo I'd never seen, Mom dancing barefoot at a wedding. Eyes closed, smile wide, she lit up every room. The message read, I framed it. That photo became my phone background, my reminder of joy untainted. Whenever I doubted myself, I looked at it. She wasn't a victim of ridicule, she was a force of grace. And every word I spoke, every boundary I drew, brought that light back into focus. Donald's lawsuit was officially dropped with prejudice. My lawyer sent over the paperwork with a note, it's over. But I knew better. Grief doesn't end with signatures. Still, I printed the notice and placed it behind Mom's framed recipe card. Closure wasn't neat, but it was earned. I'd stood my ground. I didn't shout. I didn't fight dirty. I just told the truth, and sometimes that's all it takes to turn mourning into meaning. One Saturday, I cooked Mom's chicken pot pie recipe, her handwriting propped against the spice rack. As it baked, the kitchen smelled like childhood. Raymond walked in, paused, then smiled. She's here, he said. We ate in silence, spooning comfort onto our plates. No toasts, no speeches, just quiet reverence. In that moment, I didn't feel robbed. I felt surrounded. Her legacy wasn't in memories, they fade. It lived in rituals, recipes, and the strength she left behind. A podcast host messaged me, your story changed how I talk to guests about grief. We recorded a follow-up episode. This time I laughed more at memories, not pain. I shared the sweater story, the voicemail, even the canceled wedding. Grief doesn't just hurt. I said, it teaches. That episode got shared by grief counselors, teachers, even a hospice group. Mom became a lesson not in tragedy, but in grace. Her story hadn't ended, it evolved. A young man emailed me, saying, your mom's story reminded me of mine. I finally called my estranged dad. I stared at the screen, heartful. I never meant to inspire, just to speak. But grief, when voiced, becomes a bridge. That one message made everything worth it. I forwarded it to Raymond. He replied, she wouldn't have been proud of you and of him. Her absence echoed. But her impact kept multiplying. That's what legacy really means. I was invited to write the foreword for a grief journal. At first, I hesitated. Was I qualified? But I thought of Mom. She wasn't perfect. But she showed up, she gave without keeping score. I wrote, grief isn't weakness, it's the echo of love too big for silence. When the journal was published, I placed a copy beside her photo. For once, I didn't cry, I smiled. Her love didn't end, it simply changed form. A local high school invited me to speak during Mental Health Week. I almost declined. Teens don't care about wedding drama, right? But I went. I told them about my mom, the mockery, the silence. One student raised her hand, eyes glassy. I thought I was overreacting when my uncle mocked my grief. I said, you weren't. Her nod was slow. But sure, in that room, shame turned to solidarity. My scars made space for healing. The local library added a grief support section and placed the anthology with my story in it. The librarian said, people ask for your piece the most. I visited the shelf, touched the spine nearby. A man browsed quietly, then picked it up. Our eyes met, no words needed. He nodded, I nodded back. It wasn't fame, it was resonance. Somehow, my mother's warmth had made its way to strangers. Her story kept holding hands with others. I started a grief blog. At first, just 10 readers, then hundreds, then thousands. People shared stories of stolen heirlooms, silenced funerals, friends who disappeared after loss. I didn't offer advice, just space. Raymond commented once, your mom would have baked for all of them. I laughed as she would have. The blog wasn't about my pain anymore, it was a table. And I'd set a chair for anyone who needed to sit, breathe, and be seen. One morning I received a small box. Inside was Mom's locket, the one she wore daily. No note, no sender. Just the locket. I opened it, our childhood photo still inside. I stared for minutes. Someone had returned a piece of her, quietly. Maybe guilt, maybe closure. I didn't care. I wore it around my neck that day, and suddenly I felt held. Not haunted, not hunted. Just at home. Her love found its way back to me. A grief counselor messaged me, your posts helped one of my patients open up after months of silence. I reread it 3 times. My story, born from heartbreak, had become someone else's relief. I told Raymond, who nodded. Pain shared doesn't disappear, but it stretches, makes room for others. We clinked mugs in quiet celebration. That day, I understood Mom's memory wasn't just saved, it was useful, and nothing the Sandersons did could touch that. A charity asked to name their new reading room after my mom. They'd seen my blog, heard the podcast. She made books feel like hugs. One organizer said, we held a small dedication. No speeches, just stories. People shared memories, even strangers. One child said, she sounds like a superhero. I smiled, she kind of was. Her name now lived in a place of warmth and learning, not mocked, not diminished, just honored, the way she deserved. A stranger once wrote, I didn't know your mom, but I miss her anyway. That single sentence undid me, because that's what she left behind, not just love for those who knew her, but warmth for those who never met her. Olivia's family tried to reduce her to a joke, but the world saw through it. They felt her, missed her. And in that, she became something bigger than any insult. She became unforgettable. I started mailing recipe cards, mom's best dishes, to anyone who asked. It started with 5, then 50, then hundreds. Each card said, "From Brenda's kitchen with love." I pictured them on fridges, in recipe boxes, stained with joy. Her food, her kindness, now lived in strangers' homes. That simple act became a movement. People cooked together, remembered loved ones, and wrote back, "She's family now." One note read, "My mom, adopted by the world, she'd have loved that." The final twist wasn't dramatic. Just this: I looked in the mirror and didn't see grief first. I saw strength, not from surviving Olivia's betrayal, but from protecting something pure. My mother's memory didn't just endure, it expanded. Through meals, stories, strangers. The people who mocked her, forgotten. The ones who remembered her with love, countless. I didn't fight to win, I fought to honor. And in that, I gained far more than I ever lost. I stood in my mom's old garden, overgrown but not forgotten. I trimmed one rose bush, the one she loved most. Each thorn reminded me of the jabs I'd endured, each bloom, the strength I'd gained. I whispered, "I did it, Mom." My hands were dirty, but my heart felt lighter. Her garden didn't just grow flowers, it grew me. All the silence, the shame, I left it in the soil. What remained was rooted, real, and finally mine. One evening, I reread the defamation notice, not out of anger but curiosity. It looked so small now, powerless, a threat meant to shrink me. But it failed. I folded it and slipped it into a scrapbook beside a photo of Mom and me. Not as a wound but a milestone, proof that fear had tried to silence love and lost. In that act, I reclaimed everything they tried to take from her. From me, from memory. Raymond handed me an old envelope labeled for Brendan one day. Inside was a recipe, handwritten by Mom's cinnamon rolls. "Don't forget sweet things," she'd scribbled. I baked them the next morning, scent filling the house. I brought some to the local support group. One woman cried after her first bite. "Tastes like home," she said. I smiled. Mom had fed hearts long before she left, and through me, she was still feeding them. I visited the reading room named after her. A kid sat cross-legged, flipping through a picture book. I asked what he thought. He shrugged. "It's cozy here." That was enough. Mom's name on the plaque wasn't decoration, it was permission. To feel safe, to be seen. I touched the edge of the frame. "You did it, Mom," I whispered. Not because she tried to be remembered, but because she never stopped showing up even after goodbye. A reader from my blog wrote, "Your mom helped me love my own again." It wasn't flashy, just a sentence. But I screenshotted it, saved it in a folder labeled "Worth It." Because that's what this journey had become, not revenge. Not redemption, just moments of connection, tiny flickers of her warmth, carried forward by strangers. The Sandersons' mockery faded, but her influence, it multiplied, and I got to witness it in real time daily. Grief doesn't ask for permission, it just arrives. But healing, that takes choice. I learned that as I packed away the last of Olivia's things: a bracelet, a half-burned candle. No rage, no ceremony, just closure. I dropped them at a donation bin. As I drove away, I didn't look back. The pain wasn't gone, but it wasn't my shadow anymore. I carried light now, her light, and I finally let go of what dimmed it. At the support group, someone asked, "What did you learn?" I thought, then said, "That silence helps bullies, but truth frees you." Heads nodded. I added, "And that grief isn't a problem. It's proof you loved deeply." We sat in that quiet. No platitudes, no cliches, just knowing. I didn't need applause, just that stillness. It held more healing than any revenge, more power than any confrontation. It was Mom's kind of peace, unshakable, honest, and earned. Donald's law firm dropped him. Their statement cited a pattern of reputational harm. He released a bitter blog post, blaming cancel culture. No one listened. His voice, once smug and dominant, now fell flat. Meanwhile, Raymond and I hosted a charity bake sale in Mom's honor. People lined up around the block. Her name drew more love than their mockery ever could. The contrast was loud. She was remembered. They were dismissed. Justice, in its gentlest form. Marianne moved out of state, reportedly to escape gossip, but she couldn't escape her reflection. Public sympathy never came. Her friends stopped hosting her. At a wedding she attended months later, no one saved her a seat. Silence became her new companion, the same silence she forced onto my grief. Meanwhile, I lit a candle in Mom's garden. No speeches, just stillness. Some lessons don't need noise, just space to settle. And that space was hers now. Olivia applied for a new job. My story had followed her. The hiring manager emailed me not for dirt, but to ask, "Do you believe people can change?" I paused, then wrote back, "Some do. But not when they excuse harm as humor." He replied, "Thank you for your clarity." She didn't get the job. I didn't celebrate, I just exhaled. Accountability isn't vengeance, it's the quiet reward of staying true when lies would have been easier. A neighbor who once chuckled at Donald's jokes brought over a pie. I didn't know, she said, eyes wet. I should've asked. I nodded. We didn't need more apologies, just more honesty. She sat on my porch, and we ate in silence. Not every bridge burns in fire. Some crumble quietly, then rebuild stronger. That day, I realized forgiveness wasn't letting go of hurt. It was making room for truth, and truth had finally settled in. Raymond and I created a scholarship in Mom's name for students pursuing social work. She always believed in second chances, he said. We read the first batch of essays together. One line stood out: kindness isn't weakness. It's legacy. I framed it. That scholarship wasn't about money. It was a promise that her name, once mocked, would now open doors. Her spirit didn't fade, it multiplied. In lives she'd never meet, she kept showing up. I hosted a memorial dinner on Mom's birthday, open invite. Potluck style. Every dish was one of hers. Guests shared stories, laughed, even cried. Someone brought her apple crumble, another recited a joke she loved. For hours, it felt like she was there, not as a photo on the wall, but as warmth in the room. Olivia's name never came up. She no longer mattered. What did? Love remembered, kindness celebrated, legacy living just the way Mom deserved. 1 year later, I stood at her grave, locket in hand. I kept my promise, I said. Behind me, a new bench had been installed, engraved with her name and the words, "You are still loved." A young couple sat nearby, holding hands. I didn't disturb them. Love doesn't need reminders, it leaves them behind. I smiled and walked away, not broken, not bitter, just whole. That was the real ending, and it was mine to keep. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe to check out more stories on my channel.